What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Well, yesterday there was an interview that was posted with Phil Spencer that certainly had the entire internet talking about the current state of Xbox and the future of it, and it was all over the place. We're going to try to go over some of those points here today. Also, we are going to be talking about a bit of a surprise release for a new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game on a very unlikely platform, and we'll also be going over how Nintendo got denied, and it looks like they will have to testify in court. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton, and if new here to the Spawnwave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. And we're going to start today with Phil Spencer, but this time part of it was with Starfield. I wanted to kind of separate it from everything else that was going on because we're going to be looking towards this in about a month or so with their showcase. We can see this posted up and transcribed over on Tweaktown. This from Phil Spencer says, "We did a better job with Starfield." Again, nobody should believe it until they're playing the game, but that game was earlier on in production, and it was easier for us to swarm a bunch of people to go and help with some of the technology on our platform and ensure we're going to ship a quality experience. So this is in regards to their Xbox Advanced Technology Group, who knows the Xbox really, really well. It's an internal team that should be able to help with Starfield, and when asked if there would be a clear message about the 30 or 60 frames per second with Starfield, Phil Spencer said yes, and it sounded kind of confident to where I sort of feel like we are going to have a 60 FPS mode for Starfield, as it was mentioned even prior to that with the whole Redfall debacle about how they've talked about the Xbox Series X targeting 60 frames per second, but them not necessarily getting there with titles like Redfall. So I kind of think everything's building up to there being a 60 FPS mode and even set as a reveal at the showcase next month, but I guess we'll see then. Also, we did have a response from Niantic around the situation with Pokemon Go, where according to reports, the application had hit its lowest point in 5 years when it comes to revenue generated in a month, that happening in April. Well, we can see this over on Eurogamer, who did get the response from them, where they say, "We generally don't comment on third-party estimates of our revenue, as they are often incorrect," which is the case here. "Our revenue so far in 2023 is up on last year." Now, this doesn't necessarily mention being up month to month or anything like that, just the overall year. And I did see a lot of comments down below that video yesterday mentioning that people did kind of move on because of the raid battle situation, and people saying, you know, I'm not really playing Pokemon Go as much, and it's kind of because of that one decision. Some were saying it's just over time they kind of lost some interest in it, and then they just haven't really played it for a while. But still, Pokemon Go has been very lucrative for Niantic and the Pokemon Company, and it is still interesting that they came out and decided to deny some of those claims. But I guess over time, we'll find out one way or the other if Pokemon Go is on the decline, and hey, maybe they'll respond with some changes based on player feedback. Oh, and here was a bit of a funny story that has to do with The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom and Reggie Fils-Aimé. It was on Twitter where Reggie did a quote tweet another person's image of Tears of the Kingdom and how they're clearly playing on, I guess, what will look like a modified Switch so that they could download and then play the game early. And you can see that image here where he quote tweeted and said, "I don't know what you want. What I do have are a very particular set of skills I have acquired over a very long career, skills that make me a nightmare for people like you." Obviously quoting a very famous movie there, but the person decided then to not only delete their tweet, but also delete their entire account, it seemed, or at least they locked it down to where it looked like it was just gone. And Reggie decided that wasn't enough. He screenshotted what he had tweeted before that tweet was deleted, which you can see here, just to drive the point home. And yes, hearkening back to those fabled Nintendo ninjas. Now, Reggie is not associated with Nintendo anymore, but he's still out there, I guess, just pointing people out, different targets for the Nintendo ninjas to take care of. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with Phil Spencer and an interview that he had with Kinda Funny Games on their XCast podcast. And this was a really good interview, mostly because it didn't feel like softball questions that were being asked. There were some legitimately tough questions throughout this interview that was roughly 40 minutes long, and I do recommend checking this out. And as I was going through this interview, I picked out a couple of talking points here, but I did notice that Phil, he seemed pretty stressed, and that's understandable, I guess, over the course of the last month or so. hasn't been great for Xbox with things that were happening with Redfall and the CMA blocking the Activision Blizzard deal. It definitely looked like Phil just wasn't having the best time right now, and that kind of came out as he was talking about things. He seemed kind of frazzled a bit as he was going through it, but he did give some legitimately candid answers throughout. And in fact, at times, some of the hosts for the XCast were trying to dress some things up, like, oh, 2022 was kind of a light year for Xbox, and Phil immediately comes in and says, well, I would use other words than just light. So again, he was trying to be much more straightforward and really upfront about a lot of stuff that was happening. And one thing that came up clearly was Redfall, which he goes on this XCast days after everything blows up online around that game, especially with the Metacritic scores, the reviews, and the public opinion on this game now. Yeah, it wasn't great. And looking at a quote from Phil Spencer, we can see this again from the XCast, where he says, "There's nothing that's more difficult for me than disappointing the Xbox community. I've been a part of it for a long time. I obviously work on Xbox. I'm head of the business. I have a lot of friends and get a lot of feedback. And just to kind of watch the community lose confidence, be disappointed, I'm disappointed, I'm upset with myself." So he also talks about the idea of there being support for Redfall after it's come out now, and he kind of brought up Sea of Thieves. Now, I do think they need to have the 60 FPS patch done and applied to this game. He mentioned they're on track for that, and things are looking good there. I don't know if you need to do much else outside of fix some of the bugs and glitches and broken AI and really kind of move on from it. I don't really look at this as, wow, this is something Arcane Austin should pursue, like Rare pursuing Sea of Thieves. All right, I think at this point, they just kind of move on, work on something different. It's just, Redfall, for as unique as it sounds, just does not feel like Arcane really was all in on it. It just doesn't. So it feels very generic despite being a game where you're hunting down vampires. So I'm hoping they move on kind of quickly from this one. However, he did talk about the internal expectations. Even we can see he says, we do mock reviews for every game that we launch, which is commonplace across the industry for games that have this sort of a AAA budget mounted next to it, where they'll have people internal do reviews and they'll kind of see where it'll score. But he says this is double digits lower than where we thought we would be with this game through those. That's one of the disappointing things. We would never strive to launch a game that we thought was going to review in the low 60s. It's not part of our goals. So I don't really know who did the mock reviews, but they might need more new people doing mock reviews, because it's pretty clear that this game was not going to be received well, especially in the state that it's in, because it's not finished. That's it. It's not a completed game. Whether it's the bugs, the glitches, the world, the AI, even the core structure of it, it just does not seem like a game that's finished. Seems like one that's in beta stages even. And he mentioned that, delaying it 3 months wouldn't have fixed any of those core issues technically. He's correct about that, but I do think some more polish and time kind of ironing out some of these bugs and working on the AI would have at least provided a product that's just not so blatantly busted. So as he's going through the interview, he is reflecting on basically what's happened here with Redfall, and mentions that they will be looking at some of their overall process internally. And yeah, it's probably a good idea, especially as they're acquiring these studios. It seems like they do need to be more hands-on in some of these instances, but as Phil Spencer mentions, not to the degree where they would stifle creativity. You're going to take some shots here and there at games that just might not work out with reviewers, all right? And I get that. Games where you really try to go out on a limb and just see if you can come up with something genuinely interesting, unique, and fun isn't always going to pan out, but you would expect it to release at a certain quality level, and that's just not what they hit with Redfall, and he fully admits it as he goes through the interview. So really towards the end of the interview was, I guess, a quotation that certainly had the internet buzzing, because it mentioned Sony and Nintendo and kind of how Xbox just can't seem to compete with them when it comes to the console side of things. In fact, he mentions they're not trying to out-console Nintendo or Sony. And this isn't new, so it's interesting that this really caught on, but I think it's like one soundbite or one sentence that really got people scratching their heads. And when I first heard it, I was kind of right there with everyone, but looking at it a bit more context, we can at least attempt to explain what he was trying to say here. So starting from the top, he says, I see the commentary that if you just build great games, everything will turn around. That's the sentence right there. It's just not true that if we go off and build great games, all of a sudden you're going to see console share shift in some dramatic way. We lost the worst generation to lose in the Xbox One generation, where everybody built their digital library of games. We want our Xbox community to feel awesome, but this idea is that if we just focus more on great games on our console, that somehow we're going to win the console race doesn't really lay into the reality of most people. There is no world where Starfield is an 11 out of 10 and people start selling their PS5s. That's just not going to happen. So you hear that, and it does sound like Phil Spencer's like, what do you want us to do? Even if we make great games, it's not going to work. Sony and Nintendo, they're just too strong in terms of their brands for us to ever catch up or overtake them or gain any sizable market share. And if you look at the context around this block of text and what he's saying here, he is at first referring to the console wars that are going on, the arguing back and forth online. Him saying this really just plays into the idea that Microsoft is not trying to compete when it comes to a number of units sold for their Xbox brand. They are looking at driving growth through their ecosystem and just pure revenue, which at this time is probably the path for Microsoft, considering it seems like Phil Spencer has sold the idea of Xbox not as a console, but as that all-encompassing ecosystem that includes cloud to Satya Nadella, which is probably how he got Microsoft to go out and buy Minecraft and Mojang, and how he's attempting to get them to sign a $70 billion check to acquire Activision Blizzard. However, I do push back a bit when he mentions Starfield being an 11 out of 10 won't make people go out and sell their PlayStation 5. Really, what you should say is Starfield being 11 out of 10 will get people to go out and buy an Xbox or sign up for Game Pass. People don't need to sell their PlayStation 5 to then get an Xbox. They can keep their PS5 and just get another system. That's the way that things really worked out for the Switch. Nintendo showed up with a unique concept and some great games, and look at them go. They're over 122 million, and there is a possibility, depending on how things continue, for them to catch the PlayStation 2, something no one really would have thought was possible when the Switch was first released. But I do want to stress, it doesn't seem like Phil is saying we're not going to release great games. It just seems like he understands their place in the market and what their direction currently is, which is not to sell, I guess, how many PS5s they're going to sell? 125, 130. It's not to sell 130 or 140 million Xbox systems. It's to eventually get over 100 million Game Pass subscribers or 200 million monthly active users, that sort of thing. It's just them going in a different direction overall, which should hopefully still include great games. And Phil does mention they want to try to have one out every single quarter going forward, and they believe they're just about there. And it sounds like, looking towards the showcase, could at least be a position where they can start showing off games that people can have more confidence in, and hopefully that starts right away with Starfield, since, well, that's the next big quote-unquote AAA game that they have up their sleeve. So I guess we'll find out more next month when that big showcase and Starfield Direct happens. Next up, let's talk about a bit of a surprising game reveal. This is a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles roguelike game, and I wasn't expecting this, especially with the platform that it's appearing on. That's Apple Arcade. First off, they just dropped in 20 different games, with 4 of them being brand new to the platform and just in general. Let's take a look though at the list here, and we'll start with the games that they're basically adding in from the App Store. These would be ad-free, and you can see the list this over on VGC with Chess Universe Plus, Disney Coloring World Plus, Disney Getaway Blast Plus, you get the plus idea there, Farming Simulator 20, Getting Over It, Hill Climb Racing, Iron Marines, Kingdom 2 Crowns, Limbo, that was a good game, My Town Home Family Games, Octodad, Dadliest Catch, PPKP, Snake IO, Temple Run, Time Locker, and Very Little Nightmares. Now, looking at the 4 games that are brand new, What the Car, Disney Spellstruck, Cityscape Sim Builder, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Splintered Fate. Now, I had to go out and look up some of the gameplay because this just dropped immediately. Basically, I guess a shadow drop, because I had not heard of this ahead of time. So checking it out, looks like it kind of is, I guess, that budget top-down style game, but it does have 4-player co-op. And I'll admit I have been overlooking Apple Arcade for quite some time, and when I bring it up at times, people do say it's a shockingly good selection of games for $5 per month. So much so that I might check it out in a video. I don't know. Should we? Should we go through and see what they have to offer there? Because I know we've had some games here and there that have piqued my interest. There's a really cool RPG that's, the name's escaping me right now, that people say I should check out on there. But now seeing a roguelike TMNT that has 4-player co-op just get dropped in, I'm curious what Apple has with their offerings here, because their gaming revenue, I think, is third best overall. They're like just behind Sony. So hey, maybe we'll check it out in a video coming up. But if you have Apple Arcade, check out this TMNT game and let me know down below in the comments what you think of it. And in our last bit of news, let's talk about Nintendo and how they have now been denied and will have to appear in court to testify around the entire situation with Microsoft and Activision Blizzard. This is particularly interesting because, as we know, Nintendo, very secretive company when it comes to some of their internal deals and different things that they do with development. But we can see this post up over on Tweaktown, where they say FTC Administrative Law Judge D. Michael Chappell has denied Nintendo of America's motion to quash a subpoena for testimony and ruled that Nintendo executive Steve Singer must testify before the FTC's complaint counsel in the agency's lawsuit against the Microsoft Activision merger. Now, Steve Singer is the one who negotiated that 10-year Call of Duty licensing deal with Microsoft. Remember, Microsoft kind of handing these deals out all over the place with Nintendo, Nvidia, Boosteroid, just a bunch of different companies trying to really soften up some of the regulators around the Activision deal. And according to the document here, Singer's interpretation of Additional Provision 11 is rejected. The language of Additional Provision 11 is permissive, not limiting. Moreover, Singer does not deny that he has knowledge that is relevant to this case. To interpret Additional Provision 11 in the manner urged by Singer would unnecessarily exempt from discovery a person with relevant knowledge and would conflict with the discovery rules. So interesting stuff, because we may, depending on how much is redacted and all this, may find out some information around this Microsoft Nintendo Call of Duty deal. Some things that people are curious about: would this be a cloud version? Would this be for the current Switch in general? And what year, or what's the soonest year we could expect a version of Call of Duty to show up on Nintendo's platform? Because if that is like 2025, something tells me it's not going to be on this current Switch. It would be on their next-gen platform. But this is something we want to keep an eye on here, because apparently this deposition is going to happen before May 8th. At least that's what's being reported here in those documents. So it may have even already happened, or it's set to happen sometime throughout the next week. So again, we'll keep an eye out to see if we get any official word documents, anything. Even if most of it's redacted, there could still be some stuff to pull out from there. And again, with how secretive Nintendo is, should be kind of interesting to see. And before we go to the comment of the day, we're gonna take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, if you don't own an Xbox right now, would a consistent flow of great or critically acclaimed high-profile games get you to buy one? 40% say yes, I would buy an Xbox to play those games. 35% say no, I would play them on my PC. 24% say no, I'm just not interested. And then 1% say no, I would play them using the cloud. There it is. There are cloud gamers out there somewhere, even if it's just 1%. But I think most of us can agree that this industry for gaming is driven by content or great games, compelling games, games that would get you into an ecosystem or buying a game system in general. $300, $400, $500, right? It doesn't have to be an incredible game. You might look at a game that's high 60s, low 70s, but you like it, so it's worth getting a system for it. Or again, at least subscribing to a subscription service. I mean, that's what this whole thing's about, right? Is getting a system or PC or whatever for the games. And I think that's how things will continue to drive along. It's proven time and time again, and I don't think it should be any different for Microsoft going forward. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Michael saying, Microsoft needs a God of War, Uncharted, Last of Us type AAA game. Notice all Sony's big AAA games are not FPS. Rise Son of Rome was the closest thing Microsoft had to God of War. A second Rise Son of Rome game with more polish would be a killer game. Yeah, Rise, people do still bring that up now, and I see images here and there. It's been a long time since I fired it up, because I don't think it's gotten any kind of performance or resolution boost or anything, but you see the screenshots on Twitter, it still looks really good, and it was a launch Xbox One game. I do think Microsoft missed the mark when they kind of let Tomb Raider go past them. If Square Enix was legitimately looking to sell like Tomb Raider and all these intellectual properties to Microsoft and they passed on it, that it just seems odd that they wouldn't have gone for that when it was right there. Tomb Raider was still selling really well, and I think it would have worked fine on Microsoft's platform, considering they had the timed exclusivity for Rise of the Tomb Raider, so there was sort of that alignment with Xbox already, and with Crystal Dynamics working on Perfect Dark, which maybe that's going to be their answer to Uncharted or any of these other like third-person AAA style games from Sony, it just seems like that would have made a lot of sense. But who knows, maybe if this deal falls through for Activision Blizzard, maybe Microsoft looks towards Embracer Group, and that would be quite the pickup with everything they've accumulated. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today, whether it's Phil Spencer's interview and his comments on Redfall, the entire situation there, or great games not being enough to catch them up to Nintendo or Sony. And then also, what about Apple Arcade? Am I missing out there? And then what we're seeing with Nintendo having to now testify in front of the FTC with the Call of Duty deal. Do you think we'll learn anything about that entire situation? Thanks guys for watching. Have a great weekend. I'll see you back here Monday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time for Newswave.